Hello, I'm Liam Cipher, and this is my multimedia presentation over how the Society of Brave New World, which is my book, connects to the society of the 1920s and 1930s, which is where the time period of my book. Now, the themes of the Brave New World is eugenics, which is seen through genetic modification of people into a job or class. Specific traits would be how rocket plane engineers' embryonic cycle would have a mechanism that would keep it in rotation to improve their sense of balance. And a specific trait of class would be how lower classes were made weaker through restriction of oxygen to keep the embryo below par. Industry was seen in the Brave New World through ideas of mass production and the assembly line in human reproduction, which allowed the human population to repopulate at an exponentially greater rate with more efficiency. Now, as the story describes, the human factories in which this happened to have around 15 racks that were all extremely long. Some would probably even span thousands and thousands of meters. The story also expresses the assembly line through tests and processes that happen throughout the entirety of the conveyor or rack. An example of this would be how after every 12th meter, from meter 0 to 2040, a substance would be added as a nutrient into the embryo. Now, consumerism was expressed in Brave New World through ideas of excess and self-indulgence. Happiness through excess is seen in clothes and how society only accepts new clothes while throwing out old or slightly tattered clothes. Happiness is also expressed through self-indulgence, as is present through the soma drug, which brings you to a world of bliss and friendliness, or how it's expressed through the literal self-indulgence of unattached sexual relationships with other people. Now, these themes are also present in the 1920s and 1930s, as eugenics was a very present study in the 1920s and 30s, with the idea of creating the ideal human being. Now, no scientific research was done with this, but there were public experiments like family fitter fairs where families competed for prizes in local county fairs, almost how livestock would be judged for confirmation and physical dexterity. And also how eugenics was used as a recommendation to people, as it was encouraged or forced among those with less desirable traits to be sterilized. Industry was also booming during the 1920s and 30s, and a great example of the industry boom was Ford Motor Company's mass production of the Model T car, in which they also created the assembly line for, where the use of the moving assembly line allowed the work to be taken to the worker rather than the workers moving to the work. Now, consumerism is also an important part of this, as it was a byproduct of the industry. The whole societal practice was defined with the cardinal features of this culture being the acquisition and the consumption as a means to happiness, the cult of the new, and the democratization of desire. Basically, happiness through consumption and acquisition of material gain. Now, connections in eugenics is that although they may be different processes, like how Brave New World was genetic eugenics, while the 1920s and 30s focused on experimental eugenics, where people were used rather than embryos were genetically modified. But the processes both provide ways to force a human product that can be seen as desirable for what the creators wanted. Now, connections in industry would be how Brave New World and companies like Ford Motor Company both use mass production in the assembly line in their processes in order to get a desirable product with a high precision rate through the specific nodes and progresses that don't move and stop, that don't move or stop within the assembly line. And connections in consumerism is that Brave New World expressed the acquisition of happiness through materials or clothes, or physical means, as we previously stated, while consumerism in the 1920s and 30s was explicitly described as the acquisition of happiness through the acquisition and consumption of worldly desires, like clothes, drugs, and sex. The real world counterpart that is the 1920s and 30s is what shaped and influenced the consumer society and the brave world in this sense, as the Brave New World Society was only satisfied or happy when they had the acquisition or the consumption of these desires, goods, and indulgences, just like how the 1920s and 1930s had. These are my sources, my works cited, and thank you.